When you think about the First Crusade, what comes to mind? Probably a whole lot of knights, crosses on their chests, marching off to the Holy Land just for the glory of God, right? But what if that's only half the story? What if this huge religious war was actually born from something a lot more down to earth? A really, really bad political crisis.
So which is it? A holy mission or a political masterpiece? That's the big question we're tackling today. We're going to dig into this idea that the First Crusade wasn't just some spontaneous wave of religious feeling, but maybe a super-calculated, even brilliant, political play by a pope who was, and I'm not exaggerating, fighting for his job, and maybe his life.
All right, to really get this, we've got to jump in our time machine and head back to the late 11th century. And the first thing you have to do is just forget everything you think you know about an all-powerful pope. The papacy back then? It wasn't some secure seat of power. It was in the middle of a massive, full-blown crisis.
Seriously, the church was basically under siege, and not from some outside enemy, but from the Christian kings and emperors right there in Europe. The Pope's whole claim to be the leader of Christendom was being challenged, and frankly, he was losing, badly.
Now, at the very heart of all this drama was something called the Investiture Contest. I know it sounds super dry and boring, but trust me, it was anything but. The question was pretty simple. Who gets to pick the bishops? But the stakes, they were huge. See, bishops controlled enormous amounts of land, tons of money, and even had their own armies. So you can see why this was such a big deal. Whoever controlled the bishops, well, they controlled a giant piece of the power pie in Europe. So you end up with this epic showdown, these two competing claims to power. On one side, you've got the Pope in Rome, who's saying, hey, I'm God's #1 guy on earth. And on the other side, you've got the Holy Roman Emperor over in Germany, saying, well, God appointed me to rule the world, and that includes picking my own church officials. You can see where this is going, right? A collision was pretty much guaranteed.
And boy, did that collision come. It came in the form of a massive, high-stakes power struggle between two larger-than-life figures, Pope Gregory VII and the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV.
And what's just wild is how fast the Pope's situation went from amazing to catastrophic. I mean, look at this. In 1075, Pope Gregory is claiming absolute power. 2 years later, he has the emperor himself kneeling in the snow begging for forgiveness. That's a high point, right? But then, boom, the tables completely turn. By 1084, that same emperor, Henry, marches his army right into Rome, kicks Gregory out, and puts his own guy on the papal throne as an anti-pope. A year later, Gregory dies in exile. This is the absolute mess that Pope Urban II inherits in 1088.
Just let that sink in for a second. The so-called leader of all Western Christians couldn't even get into his own capital city. He was basically a fugitive pope. Meanwhile, a puppet of the emperor is sitting on the throne of St. Peter in Rome. Urban needed something big. He needed a game changer, a total Hail Mary pass that could flip the whole political chessboard of Europe on its head.
And this, right here, is where the call for a crusade comes in. Not just as some pious mission, but as an incredibly clever and super risky political move. The solution to all his problems in the West, funny enough, was in the East.
Okay, so check out how brilliant Urban's strategy was. Step 1. Take all these violent warring knights who are causing chaos all over Europe and unite them under one banner, his banner. Step 2. Ship all that violence thousands of miles away. Problem solved. Step 3. By answering a call for help from the Eastern Roman Emperor, he could make himself look like the true leader of all Christians, Catholic and Orthodox. And finally, Step 4. If this insane plan actually worked, everyone would see it as God's will. That would give him a kind of divine authority that no emperor could ever hope to challenge.
And you don't have to take my word for it. The historian Thomas Asbridge puts it just perfectly. He says the crusade wasn't just about helping out the East. It was a proactive strategy to fix the crisis in the West. It was all about building up papal power like never before.
I mean, this is what makes it such a genius move. It completely changes the game. Urban goes from being a pope on the run to the commander-in-chief of the biggest army Christendom had ever seen. It was a brilliant way to outmaneuver his enemies and completely redefine the power of the papacy.
But, okay, hold on. It's a great theory, and it sounds really convincing. But we've got to kick the tires on it a little bit. Was Urban's situation really that bad? And more importantly, was launching a crusade actually a logical plan? So this leads us to two really important questions. Let's take the first one. How weak was Pope Urban, really, in 1095 when he called this whole thing?
When you actually look at the evidence, the picture gets a little more complicated. On the one hand, yeah, he's exiled from Rome, the anti-pope's there, the emperor hates him, that's all true. But, on the other hand, Urban wasn't just sitting around. He was on a massive tour of France and Italy, building up support, making friends. He even got Emperor Henry's own wife and son to switch to his side. And holding a big church council at Piacenza, deep inside enemy territory, that was a serious power move. So maybe, just maybe, the papacy wasn't quite on the verge of collapse.
And that brings us to the second and maybe even bigger problem with the theory. Think about it. If your main goal is to defeat the emperor in Germany, does it make any sense at all to send your best and most loyal soldiers on a multi-year death march to Jerusalem? It's kind of a weird strategy.
I mean, there were way more logical options on the table. Popes had called for holy wars in Europe before. In fact, just a decade earlier, Pope Gregory offered the forgiveness of sins to anyone who would fight against Emperor Henry. A crusade against the emperor in Germany would have been cheaper, faster, and way more direct. And let's be honest, the chances of this huge expedition to the east actually succeeding were, by any sane calculation, astronomically low.
So, where does all this leave us? Was it a stroke of political genius, or was it a desperate, totally illogical gamble? Well, like with most things in history, the real answer is probably somewhere in the middle.
The First Crusade wasn't an either-or kind of thing. It wasn't just about politics, and it wasn't just about religion. It was a perfect storm, a moment in time where these two incredibly powerful forces, political ambition and genuine faith, crashed into each other and became impossible to separate.
You really have to see these two things as two sides of the very same coin. For a guy like Urban, making the papacy more powerful was a holy mission. Uniting all Christians under his command wasn't just smart politics, he truly believed it was God's work. And for the knights marching east, sure, getting your sins forgiven was the ultimate prize, but the chance to win glory, land, and wealth didn't hurt either. The politics and the religion just fed into each other.
So if you're going to take one thing away from this, let it be this. The Pope's political crisis created the opportunity. It created the framework for something like the Crusade to even be possible. But it was the deep, passionate religious faith of that era that provided the fuel. Politics might have lit the match, but piety was the powder keg that sent tens of thousands of people marching all the way to Jerusalem. And that really leaves us with one last big question to chew on. The story of the First Crusade shows us this incredible moment where religious belief and political strategy just completely fused together. And it makes you wonder, in the long story of humanity, can faith ever really, truly be separated from the power structures that try to control it?